So many people with Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism have this condition called alexithymia, which I simply refer to as emotional blindness. Many of you who have researched autism have heard of mind blindness, and I won't go into that in this video, although there will be a link underneath this video that will direct you to more information on mind blindness. But in this video, we're really talking about emotional blindness. So what I mean by that is, if I have alexithymia, I'm not really sure how I feel, and I have a problem putting my feelings into some type of a vocabulary. I also have trouble reading other people's emotions or understanding what they're referring to when they're actually talking about their emotions. So since I'm kind of in the dark with respect to emotions, both in myself and others, I prefer talking to people about their daily activities and about facts and tasks rather than feelings. So if I have alexithymia, I have difficulty communicating or describing emotions to others, so it's difficult for me to find the right words for my feelings. And since it's awkward conversation for me, the feelings conversation, I tend to want to shy away from those conversations. It's especially problematic for me in the case where I have a neurotypical spouse and she wants to talk to me about how she feels, and it's a double whammy for me, so to speak, when she wants to talk to me about how she feels with respect to the problems we're having in the relationship. So now I'm really in a conversation that I don't want to have. Also, when I'm in a conversation with my spouse about feelings and about problems in the relationship, I have feelings that I can't quite identify. So honestly, I can't even have an emotionally intelligent conversation with my neurotypical wife because she's really speaking French and I simply don't know how to speak French. In fact, alexithymia literally means no words for feelings. So if I have the inability to understand the intricacies of feelings and emotions, and I have difficulty trying to name, understand, and talk about feelings, I'm either going to avoid conversations where I'm required to talk about how somebody else feels and how I feel, or if I do try to have that conversation, I'm probably going to do it very poorly, which I then run the risk of coming off to the other individual as insensitive, uncaring, selfish, lacking empathy and sympathy, and maybe even come off as being somewhat narcissistic. So alexithymia is not just a lack of interest in emotional connection. It's a lack of desire to engage in emotional connection because I struggle with it so much. And that's frustrating to me. But unfortunately, it's also frustrating to the person that wants to connect with me at an emotional level, and I simply can't or don't. Some of the symptoms of alexithymia would be a narrow capacity to understand the reasons behind certain emotions, heightened sensitivity to physical touch, which causes a real problem in the area of intimacy with my significant other, struggling to identify emotions expressed by others, difficulty with naming different kinds of emotions, indifference towards other people, and in some cases saying or doing something that others perceive as highly inappropriate because I simply don't have the emotional intelligence to filter some of the things that I may say or do that may be hurtful to others. Another interesting and unfortunate manifestation of alexithymia is, since I'm not in tune with my emotions, that doesn't mean that the emotion isn't there. It just means that I can't identify it very well with the emotional part of my brain. So what ends up happening is I tend to get physical symptoms of the emotion that's not getting expressed properly. In other words, I have a particular feeling that I can't express in a functional way, and so my body ends up expressing that feeling in perhaps a dysfunctional way. For example, a person who is very angry yet doesn't know how to express their anger might develop a stomach ache or a headache or an ulcer. A person who is very anxious but can't identify that they're in a state of anxiety might develop high blood pressure. They may slip into rage, meltdowns, and even shutdowns. The treatment options for alexithymia are usually very different from typical counseling or talk therapy. The therapist who has an expertise in this area will most likely concentrate on building a foundation of naming emotions and appreciating a range of emotions. or more broadly, the process will involve helping the individual grow their emotional intelligence. The challenges facing some women who are married to a man with Asperger's or high-functioning autism can be difficult to navigate. These challenges may be completely hidden to other family members, friends, and co-workers. No one seems to understand what the wife struggles with. Her husband may seem to be a good guy who appears perfectly normal to everyone else. Being married to a man on the autism spectrum may be filled with a predictable, progressive pattern that goes from joyful to puzzled to irritated to angry and finally to hopeless. In the beginning, the wife may have been swept off her feet and ravished with affection and attention. She was the primary focus of her boyfriend's life. His obsession with the relationship felt romantic and intoxicating. But after a few years of marriage, this feeling may have faded. The waning of affection is not conscious on the Asperger's husband's part. He's most likely not even aware that this has happened. However, as time goes on, the wife may experience certain negative emotions associated with her husband's need to find interesting activities in places outside of the relationship. Examples of these emotions can include the following. Hopelessness, when the wife's best effort to resolve the ongoing relationship difficulties goes nowhere. A lack of hope may permeate the relationship and lead to a separation or divorce. Rejection. Men on the autism spectrum are often consumed by their special interest. They may be chronically distracted by this interest and find it difficult to pay attention to their wife. This may lead her to feel neglected, or it can be misinterpreted as disinterest on the part of her husband. Resentment. This emotion becomes prevalent when the wife feels ignored, disregarded, disrespected, and alone in the relationship. Some wives will respond to this by becoming very angry and yelling at their husband, while others will shut down and block out all emotions, with the possible exception of sadness and depression. Extreme fatigue. As the wife tries to compensate for the lack of equal sharing or follow-through in responsibilities, she often feels exhausted. In her mind, no amount of effort appears to resolve the problems that continue to plague the relationship. Due to the inconsistency in her husband's willingness to take responsibility for things and feelings of being burdened with more than her fair share of tasks, more feelings of exhaustion and tension are manifest. Feeling devalued. Wives of Asperger's husbands often get the feeling that all their good suggestions and advice are not taken to heart. This may cause the wife to come to the conclusion that her ideas, opinions, wants, and needs are worthless to her husband. Disappointment. In the viewpoint of the wife, the same kinds of problems keep presenting themselves over and over again. She has tried to discuss the issues in question, and she has tried to make herself understood, yet the same problems persist. Feeling isolated. Because her husband seems disinterested in what she has to say and appears to ignore her, it's easy to understand why the wife may feel lonely. Since the husband with Asperger's or high-functioning autism may not even be aware that the marriage has changed for the worse, he doesn't understand why his wife is always so demanding and bitchy. Her increasing dissatisfaction, resentment, and complaints only further damage any chances of communication and intimacy because the husband feels that he can never do anything right, and he too may even feel unloved. The negative downward spiral that we just looked at may be avoided when both spouses understand the way Asperger's symptoms are affecting the relationship. It is indeed very possible to learn different behaviors to heal these kinds of wounds. Okay, what if I said you are neurotic and a monomaniac? What I mean is neuroticism is basically being under a state of anxiety for so many years that it has become a personality trait. And monomania, what I mean by that term is simply spending a lot of time on one activity to the exclusion of most others. So why would you be neurotic and monomaniacal? In a nutshell, you are someone on the autism spectrum who has tried to figure out the neurotypical world. And at some level, that has been extremely difficult, in some cases impossible. What does that result in? A lot of anxiety. And if you have this anxiety over a number of years or decades, it becomes a personality trait. So now we're talking neuroticism. So what does a neurotic do? They try to alleviate their anxiety, in this case by engaging in a special interest for lengthy periods of time because it's relaxing. But unfortunately, it causes problems because as a child, your parents are pissed because you're spending all your time with your special interest instead of doing homework. And with your spouse, she's pissed because you're spending all your time doing your special interest instead of spending time with her. So your special interest calms you down, takes the anxiety away for the moment, but increases your anxiety in the long term because now people are upset with you because you've disengaged from the neurotypical world. And why wouldn't you? Since this world doesn't fit at some level. Think of it like this. What if you were able to travel to planet Autism and everybody up there had an autism spectrum disorder, and we're talking about ASD level 1 or high functioning autism, Asperger's syndrome, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's the same though. So now you don't have to try to figure out the neurotypicals because they ain't got no neurotypicals up there. So you're up there on planet Autism. There's no anxiety now because everybody's the same. So therefore you haven't turned into a neurotic because you have, in other words, you haven't had a long-standing anxiety over decades, and now your anxiety has turned into a personality trait called neuroticism. So that doesn't exist. And now there's no need to be a monomaniac, in other words, engage in one special activity all the time to the exclusion of most others, because there's no anxiety to run from. Yeah, in this little fantasy world here on planet Autism, it's possible that everybody is engaging in their special activity, but it doesn't matter because that is the norm. That's what everybody is doing. You don't get chastised for doing that because that is the normal thing to do. So now the question becomes, is high functioning autism truly a disorder? Well, in a neurotypical world, yes, it is a disorder. In other words, it's a bad order. Translation, it's an unpopular way to connect with people that are neurotypicals. But on planet Autism, where there are no neurotypicals, the autistic brain is now typical. So in this way, there would be no disorder. Instead, it would be order. So high-functioning autism, or ASD level 1, is a developmental disorder. And what that means is developmentally, your partner or spouse on the autism spectrum has a social emotional brain that is underdeveloped relative to its logical brain. So you, if you are an NT wife, neurotypical, you no doubt are very high in social intelligence, very high in emotional intelligence. Your partner on the spectrum is low in both of those areas. And to make matters even slightly more complicated, the autistic brain is overly logical. So we have the underdeveloped social emotional brain and the overly developed logical brain. Now, why could that cause a problem? You wouldn't think that having too much logic could possibly be an issue. It's like, how can you eat too many vegetables? But if you have an overly logical brain, you get stuck in analysis all the time. You get stuck in the planning phase. You get stuck hooked on one little detail, and you can't move forward with implementation. It's hard to get from thought to action. You may have experience with your husband who has high-functioning autism that, for example, if you're planning a vacation, he plans and plans and plans and plans and gets stuck on just 2 or 3 details, and he can't see the big picture. And then you have to be the one to actually implement the plan. So with the overly logical brain, you get stuck on a thought. and it's hard to move forward with action. You've heard of the phrase ready, aim, fire, right? So with the overlogical brain, it's like ready, aim, 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 and you never get to the fire part. So if I have an overly logical brain and I am planning a project, for example, initially I am the thinker in charge of the thoughts. But when overanalysis kicks in, now the thoughts are in charge of the thinker. And I involuntarily get sucked into rumination. And therefore my thought stream kind of goes in circles. The high-functioning autistic brain is an overthinking brain, and overthinkers believe they're helping themselves by rehashing their problems in their heads or going over all the details with respect to what might go wrong. The overly logical brain will also overthink with respect to relationships. For example, the autistic partner might be thinking along the lines of, I don't think I'm capable of meeting her wants or needs. I doubt that I'll ever understand how she feels. I'm starting to doubt our long-term compatibility. And also, I read a lot of extra things into her words and actions. In other words, I just assume rather than verifying why she is saying or doing what she is, and I will tend to put a negative spin on her behavior. Overanalysis can also result in difficulties making decisions. In other words, I'm not sure what to say or do in this situation, or I'm not sure what would be the perfect pick, option A, or option B, or option C. And also, overanalysis can result in procrastination. It's like, if I can't do this thing perfectly, I'd rather not do it at all. I'll get to it someday. When I have all my ducks lined up in a row, then I'll do it. And as you probably have guessed, in this case, the thing never gets done. Since my social intelligence and emotional intelligence is low, I have a hard time reading body language, facial cues, tone of voice, volume of voice, filling in between the lines when somebody's somewhat vague. Since I have this mind blindness issue where I'm not really sure what people's motives are, I'm not really sure what's going on inside of their thinking process, I'm not really sure what they're feeling in their heart, I'm not really sure what they're planning. I have a hard time predicting outcomes based on this misinformation that I'm getting because I have this mind blindness thing. So what ends up happening is I'm always in a state of confusion because I never really totally know what the hell's going on. And I'm like dodging paintballs all day. I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is this person thinking, or what are they feeling? Is it my fault? Is it something else? And there's this guesswork that goes on all goddamn day long. And so since you're in a constant state of confusion and guesswork, as you well can imagine, causes a lot of anxiety. Because I never know what the hell's going on. I'm always trying to guess what's going on. So I am literally in a heightened state of anxiety to one degree or another. I'm never not anxious unless I'm engaging in my special interest, but for the most part, I'm in some form of anxiety all day long. What do I do when I'm anxious 24/7? I probably even have anxious dreams. So what do I do in that case? I engage in anxiety reduction. Since I'm anxious all the time, I do as many things as I know how to reduce my anxiety. But I have found in many cases the individual's anxiety reduction techniques at the very best only work temporarily, and in many cases not even temporarily. But in most cases, the anxiety reduction techniques, which would be anger, rage, shutdowns, meltdowns, whatever, I mean, the list is long. Their anxiety reduction technique actually increases the anxiety. I often get a lot of complaints from neurotypical wives regarding their Asperger's or high-functioning autistic husband's lack of cooperation or unwillingness to be a team player, so to speak. So what if I told you that your husband was exhibiting non-compliance or not being very cooperative for a good reason, at least in his mind? Many people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism are simply not comfortable with things that don't make sense to them. These individuals are what I'm going to refer to as rationale dependent, and they're largely focused on logic. They need to know the reasons for the rules or the expectations in order to avoid both confusion and anxiety. So you no doubt have certain expectations and certain needs and wants, of course, but blindly accepting these expectations that you have is not the way the rational dependent person functions. So your husband needs to understand the reasons behind your actions, why you want something done in a particular way, and it has to make sense to him. Since he is overly analytical, he often behaves, quote, inappropriately, unquote, which is a term you probably have used, because he never gets past the analysis stage to the action stage. If one of your wants or needs or expectations seems unreasonable to him, there's no need to follow it in his mind, and he probably won't listen to you when you try to push the point or insist on him meeting your expectations. So one of the best things to keep in mind when you're trying to get your point across is to give this man the reasoning behind your decision or your action and make it very convincing. The rationale dependent person's coping strategy is to try to make sense of the world through logic and reasoning. In order to minimize emotional stress, he needs the world to be a place with order and symmetry to it. Therefore, you may have found that when you have a certain expectation or need or want that he doesn't understand, he asks a lot of questions about it. But using his well-developed analytical brain, he eventually makes sense of things and comes to an acceptable understanding of what's going on if it's presented in a way that is logical and rational. Your husband on the spectrum is no doubt very bright with a high IQ, and he will usually become more flexible when given a reasonable explanation for a particular expectation or need or want. So it'll be important to speak to him in terms of what you need rather than how you feel about something. He's not going to be able to take how you feel and then apply that to some action that he's supposed to execute. But if you speak to him in terms of what you need and give a good, solid, logical reason for that need, he's more likely to comply. He's probably going to have his own reasons and explanations beforehand that are not going to be in alignment with your reasons and explanations. Therefore, simply stating your expectation or need or want is not enough. It needs to be followed with some clarification and a high amount of logic, in which case his lack of cooperation will likely decrease. As an NT spouse, your brain is no doubt highly intelligent in the social and emotional sense. His is not. He's highly logical, and so when you want to appeal to his logic, you stand a much better chance of getting him to be a true team player. So one thing that often comes up when I'm working with neurotypical women in a relationship with a man on the autism spectrum, or vice versa, is she will say, I try to talk to him and he doesn't get it. I keep going over the same thing again and again and again. He doesn't get it. I keep trying to tell him what the problem is and what he can do to help alleviate the problem. He still doesn't get it. And so with this business of problem solving, what you're running into, if you're not getting the problem resolved, is you guys aren't agreeing on what the problem is. I run into this every time, as in 100%. She will go, when she's talking to him, well, the problem is this. And he'll go, no, that's not the problem. The real problem is that. And she will go, what? Are we on the same planet? No, this is the problem. I'm telling you, that's the problem. And he goes, no, that is not the problem. You're wrong. This is the problem. So you see where this gets nowhere, because the two of you can't even agree on what the freaking problem is to begin with. So the first step in problem solving, which doesn't even get to the desired result, because you have to first establish some kind of a bond or some kind of a trust that we are going to just worry about identifying the problem. Let's don't worry about solving it just yet. Let's just see if we can identify it. So that would be the first step. Now, I understand in some cases the two of you are just going to disagree what the problem is, and that's fine as long as you agree that you're going to disagree on what the problem is. But we still have found the problem. It's just now the problem is 1A and 1B. So it's still, in a sense, just one problem. It's just a two-pronged problem. So anyway, this is the deal that I run into is you guys are first going to have to somewhat agree on what the problem is, and then move from there. But if you say the problem is A, and he goes, no, the problem is B, and you try to compromise, negotiate, have a meeting of the minds based on two versions of the problem, most often that's going to be a fail, because he's going to want to resolve problem B while you're trying to resolve problem A, and since the two of you aren't working together, the rest is history. The problem doesn't get solved. Hey guys, this is Mark. Click on the join button underneath any of my videos, then click on members only videos, and then click on join, and for $9.99 a month, you'll have access to members only videos, which are excerpts from previous workshops I've conducted for NT partners, ASD partners, and the neurodiverse couple. New videos will be uploaded weekly. Hey guys, this is Mark. I'm taking on some new clients. There's my email address right there. I do have about a 4-week waiting period. So if you'll email me, I'll put you on my waiting list. And in approximately 4 weeks from today, we'll be able to meet face-to-face using Zoom or Skype. And we can talk about the relationship difficulties you're having in your neurodiverse marriage where one person is autistic, the other one is not. And we will come up with some preliminary intervention strategies to do some marital conflict repair. So feel free to email me and we'll get started soon. I've been working with people online for 25 plus years. So I've been around the block a time or two, and so I look forward to hearing from you.